Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching today's long-range forecast video brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. This analysis is being provided for perspective only, and any decision made based upon this presentation is the sole responsibility of the person making the decision. Finally, please remember that all long-range weather forecasting is speculative by nature. Well, early this morning, I'm recording the video right here in Fargo, and it is very, very cold early this morning. We have wind chill advisories out for a large section of the north central plains, and downwind of us here in Fargo, we've got winter weather advisories and winter storm watches out for parts of eastern Minnesota and Wisconsin. Also, early this morning, some light snow moving through parts of Iowa and into northern Illinois. And just to remind you, earlier this week where we had some light snow that came into this area, we did see some major traffic accidents on I-80 with some of the stronger winds and the quick snow bursts that came out of this. Our main frontal boundaries finally pushed here through the south and east, and on the backside of that we did get some snow into parts of the southeast with the cold air that is coming behind this. But when I say cold, take a look at these temperatures this morning. This was valid about 5:15 when I was making the recording here, and while I was at minus 16, we do see that our main frontal boundary is pushed all the way into Florida at this point. In fact, we can see it pretty well here by looking at the surface winds. That's where the main position of the front is. Behind it, higher atmospheric pressure is kind of in control across much of the lower 48, but we will be watching a deep low that's here in the Gulf of Alaska that's going to make for some very unsettled weather in the Pacific Northwest in the coming days. So what are we going to talk about here in the short term? Well, first thing will be, we've got a couple of little clipper systems coming through the north central part of the United States, while toward the end of the week, a deep low forms here over the southeast and then runs up the east coast. After that, we then see a system coming through the Ohio River Valley early next week that's going to be very problematic for those folks. And then it does seem to see that things clear out after that for at least a short time. But a major theme of this of this video is that much of the flow of the jet stream is unblocked at this point, and as a consequence, I think we're going to continue to see an active pattern with short time periods in between where things are relatively calm. So let me show you what I'm talking about here. With the deep low that's sitting in the Gulf of Alaska, we will be getting some stronger onshore flow. So parts of the Cascades and Northern Rockies able to pick up quite a bit of snowfall through the next 60 hours. This takes us out to Friday midday. But snow levels, especially in the Cascades, are relatively high due to the warmer conditions. Now coming back to the center part of the United States, this is the snow we're expecting. It's already right there early this morning in parts of Iowa and going into northern Illinois. Maybe some locally heavier amounts with maybe some folks getting over an inch. But north of that, this will be the track over the next few days of where we're going to be some of our clipper systems sweeping through the Dakotas, specifically North Dakota, but getting into parts of Minnesota. And then as it gets over to Wisconsin and the UP and Michigan, maybe some heavier amounts. Speaking about the Great Lakes here, downwind of Erie and Ontario with the cold air that's in place, could get some shore parallel snow bands there forming with potentially very heavy amounts. But here's the bigger story. Over the next 5 days, so this takes you out to Sunday evening, remember the west got some strong onshore flow. There's a high pressure cell here with that low that's in this area, and it's kind of firing the flow straight out of the west into the Cascade Mountains in the northern part of California. All right. We'll see the Clipper system moving through here toward the end of the week. And then on Friday, we're going to watch this low emerge here and race up the East Coast Saturday morning. Then the next system begins to take shape here early next week here in the Panhandles. And as it dips to the south, watch out for snow in this corridor that will then build here into the eastern part of the United States. So let's get into that short-term forecast first by looking at our European model. So early this morning on Wednesday, here's the little system out ahead of this high-pressure cell that's coming into parts of Iowa and Illinois. We can see the exiting front here over the southeast and the first push of moisture coming into the west. As we play this forward, let's pause it right there. You will notice that the west is taking the brunt of that system coming in as we get out for the next 24 hours here. And here comes the little clipper through parts of North Dakota, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. Meanwhile, higher atmospheric pressure builds into the east, and that's critical for the timing of the next system out of the southeast. And here's what I'm talking about. By the time I get you into Friday morning, we see that starting to emerge here. Friday at 6 a.m., high pressure cell sits just here off the northeast. And why we watch these so carefully is that we could get right along the Appalachian Mountains some cold air damming, and that could result in some freezing rain here in through parts of Virginia and North Carolina. But this system then rapidly pulls to the north throughout the day on Friday, getting you into Saturday morning, developing into a very large low pressure system. And because its trajectory is to the north like this looks to be a widespread rain event with quite a bit of warm air first. But notice this, as we get out here to Saturday afternoon, Saturday evening, Enough cold air wraps around the back side of this, so we could be bringing in some snow and some very windy conditions in through here. Look out for lake effect snow bands coming off the tip of Lake Superior and then here in the UP at Michigan. And look at the changeover to snow on the back side of this as this low pressure system wraps itself out into the northeast by the time we get into Sunday morning. So very windy, very cold conditions coming in behind this as high pressure settles in. At this time, our next system is taking shape Sunday morning right here, coming out of Colorado, New Mexico, and in the Texas and Oklahoma panhandles. And what we're going to see with that system is that low forms and starts to dip south, moving into Texas, such that by Sunday night sits here, and Monday morning is starting to emerge in the mid-south. Now, this system's got a far enough southerly trajectory that throughout the day on Monday, we're going to watch for widespread snow to be spreading on the northern side of this and very heavy rainfall to the south. And you can see that this could potentially produce some major travel headaches, starting from Missouri all the way over to Pennsylvania here. And while parts of Tennessee, Kentucky are going to start off on rain, cold air comes in on the back side of this. So we're going to be watching out for what we generally call a wintry mix. So some sleet, freezing rain transition here as the warm air overruns surface cold air, and then snow on the back side. Now, after that goes through, the operational models bring in high pressure and really make things relatively boring for the end of next week. But I think as we get into week 3 and week 4, this pattern, which is unblocked, continues to remain active. It just kind of goes in these 4 to 5 day sprints of active weather, and then high pressure comes in calming things down. Then active weather, calming things down, where nothing is in the works to stop that in the near term. So let's do a quick multi-model analysis on this low pressure system that we see emerging next Monday. These snapshots here from the European model over here on the left, this is going to be Monday evening. So it's got the low pressure center put right here over parts of Tennessee and Kentucky with the snow on the back side. The GFS is much more amplified with the pattern, so the trough is lifting quicker, and it's got the low pressure center back here, Missouri, Illinois, kind of centered right there on St. Louis. That pushes the snow farther to the north and potentially brings quite a bit more moisture out ahead of this, right in through here, maybe even some severe weather with it. So let's just see what this multi-model analysis tells us by bringing in a model from Germany and also one from Canada. So European again, got the low pressure center here by next Monday night. GFS farther west and farther north. You can see that Germany's ICON model agrees more with the ECMWF, as do the Canadians. So it looks right now that the GFS is the outlier with keeping the system farther west and to the north. So we have to look then at what the ensembles are picking up. So we're going to go straight to the European ensemble. This would be next Sunday afternoon. You can see the low emerging here out of that region, Oklahoma, Texas, New Mexico, and Colorado. It then dips to the south by the time we get into midnight on Monday morning. And then as we emerge this system into the mid-south here on Monday afternoon, it's tucked away right in through here and then moves into the Ohio River Valley by basically midnight on Tuesday. So overall, this system is forecast to do that. The GFS, this. And the difference is all in the magnitude and the depth of the trough ridge system coming through, which means we're going to have to watch this very carefully in the coming days to see how this emerges on Sunday to kind of give us our final rundown of where it's going to go. The point is it's going to be quite active. Now, I only want to show you snowfall that's going to go out to next Tuesday morning. Okay, so the GFS is on the left, European is on the right. And as that system emerges here, this will be the corridor. They're going to be watching for the greatest potential for picking up at least 3 inches of snow. So those are probabilities there, 50 to 70% chance of picking up 3 inches of snow on the northern side of this, and the models are actually in pretty good agreement about it. Now remember, I stopped this on Tuesday morning, so as this system Tuesday morning through the end of the week cranks up here, we're going to be seeing snowfall amounts increase in this area. All right, so that's this next system that's coming through. We did notice that looking fully at week 2, higher pressure did come in and kind of calm things down a bit here. But as I said, I think this is cyclical right now. It just comes in 4 or 5 days of active weather, then 4 or 5 days of calmer weather. And this is going to keep doing that through the end of the year. You can already see the West Coast getting back over to its active pattern here into week 2. But you can see a difference with the GFS being much wetter than the European, and I want to show you exactly why that is. So we're going to take a look here at our upper level winds and heights. So this is the GFS on the left, the European on the right, and these two models are in very good agreement through the coming days. So here we go. By the time we get into Friday afternoon, the trough extending here in both models, it's out ahead of it that the low pressure center begins to form on Friday, And as that trough deepens behind it in the overnight hours on Friday and Saturday morning, that's what lifts this system here to the northeast. And as it lifts, remember, it's pulling everything to the north. That's why we're seeing a big rainfall event initially, with the colder air coming in the backside here on Saturday afternoon and Sunday, keeping things cold. Meanwhile, the atmosphere reloads. See the next trough sweeping through right here? This is Monday's system, which we talked about, coming through. Why is the GFS more aggressive? Well, it's better connected, this trough is, with the trough that's sitting here just to the west of Hudson Bay. The European, see how they're disconnected? Hence, farther to the south and east, the European will be placing the low. The GFS, because they are connected, pulls the trough further to the north and east and puts it over parts of Illinois. It's a subtle difference, but it's why there is a difference in the position of these lows. Now let's get that system out of the way as we move through midweek. And after that, look at this. General rising of heights happening here in the midsection of the country, but the European, much broader, bringing in much warmer conditions. We'll take a look at that in a second. The GFS keeping things much more amplified. And look at the difference in the orientation by the time we get out to the end of next week in this trough out in the Gulf of Alaska. Much flatter in the GFS, much longer in the European. And the GFS is therefore firing between this trough and this ridge, a whole lot more moisture into Northern California and Oregon, and then spreading it north and south from there. What's the European doing? Well, it's kind of bringing in higher heights here in a much weaker flow. And that's why the GFS was wetter for the West Coast. But to be honest, out through day 10, 11, 12, 13, the models are at least in agreement that we're going to be bringing this broader trough into the west. And that's important because that pattern is one that tells me that getting into week 3 and week 4, there's nothing to slow this down. I'll make another case for that in just a few moments here. So what are our temperatures doing? Well, over the next 5 days, the coldest axis of air is kind of tucked in through this area. And certainly we're averaging in the colder weather that's already come through on that front that we just saw coming through the day yesterday. But you can see the rebounding warmth out west in both models. That's the next 5 days. Days 6 through 10. Remember, behind the system that emerges next Monday into Tuesday, we get another shot at some colder air. But remember, the disconnect in the troughs in the European model keeps that colder air farther to the north. Still the cool bias, but not nearly as cold as the GFS, which is over there on the left. In days 11 through 15, major model discrepancy at this point. Remember, the GFS is much more amplified. Remember this? That's what the trough ridge pattern looks like. Whereas the European model, well, it hangs that trough back further here and broadens the flow over this area. Again, at this point, I'm moving over toward favoring the GFS because I think the European, with 51 different members in the ensemble, I think it's kind of washing out the overall pattern. So keep a close eye on this temperature pattern as we move to the end of December here, all right? Now, why do I think things continue to stay active? Well, part of it is the polar vortex, well, it's sitting right here right now, is pivoting. This is what it's going to look like by day 10. And while the operational models are attempting to pinch off 2 pieces of it, the ensembles aren't having any of it. We're having a difficult time also seeing in the models how we're connecting the tropospheric flow, that's a layer we live in, with the stratospheric flow, which is where the polar vortex is. So right now at this point, a polar vortex disruption, such that we're going to block up the pattern, doesn't seem highly likely at this stage, even though the operational models are kind of advertising it might do that by the end of the year. I just think that at this point, the disconnect between the stratosphere and the troposphere are too great to really be seeing a strong influence by the polar vortex at this point. So why do I say the pattern is unblocked, and why do I think it's going to go on this 4 to 5 day pattern shift idea? It's all because of this. We see that through day 10 at the surface, higher pressure is occupying, well, the Arctic right in through here. And it's even out there into day 15. So what does that mean? Well, low pressure centers keep orbiting around this. You can see them here. And as long as that sets up that way, we tend to just get lots of low pressure systems moving through the mid-latitudes. And it's being fueled by a strong jet stream that's just running around the northern hemisphere just like this. So that's why I see, looking out into week 3 and week 4, the pattern continuing to stay active. Is there other supporting evidence of this, and is anything changing? Well, over the last 45 days, we've seen a lot of warmth being pushed here into the North Pacific and into the North Atlantic, and the cooler air has been coming down out of the Canadian prairies, occupying a big section of the mid part of the United States and Canada. What's been causing this? Well, this is what our flow has looked like, well, at least over the last about 40 days or so. We've seen in the northern hemisphere a preference for more ridging here and broader troughing there. But notice how these anomalies are not that strong, and that's because the flow pattern's been largely unblocked. Now, where's it been really regular? Look at the daisy chain of troughs that have been down here in South America. Southern hemisphere. I'm going to talk about what that means for South America here at the end of this video, though, okay? So I wanted to understand, where's our transport of energy and moisture really been? Well, with the positive phase of the Indian Ocean dipole, very dry in Indonesia and very dry in Australia, we've pushed a lot of our upward motion and therefore more precipitable water over toward Africa. But we have been seeing momentum transporting that moisture out like this, and like that. And it's also favored wetter conditions in the Amazon curling into this area recently, with drier conditions here and dry in through that corridor as well for South America. Well, this is how things have been while the Indian Ocean dipole has been coming off of its peak. And in the near term, we continue to see the Indian Ocean dipole favoring drier conditions here, wetter over here in this part of Africa, but a bit of a shift in how that momentum is being transformed out of the tropics here, favoring a little bit more of this over in the western part of the North Atlantic. It's also changing things down in South America as well. Over the next 15 days, we're seeing the monsoonal flow coming in here into Brazil like this up into the Amazon, and then curling right back around here through parts of Paraguay, Mato Grosso do Sul, Paraná, and Rio Grande do Sul. That's this area right in through here. Argentina's main growing area, like Cordoba, Santa Fe, does look wet, but here to the west and south, it's looking dry. But this feature here is one I want you to pay attention to because it's forecast to remain dry through the end of the year here. But as the Indian Ocean dipole continues to crash, will there be a change in that? Because right now it's gone all the way back to levels that it was back at the beginning of August in terms of its strength, and therefore we're starting to see this happen. As we move to the end of the month, we still keep good upper level support here for more rainfall, but the sinking, suppressive motion of the atmosphere is becoming a bit more ragged, and that's what we're talking about over in this corridor, and that is certainly going to change things up for South America. Now remember this, okay? If South America is going to be dry in January, in February, the MJO has to come out and stay in phases 3, 4, 5, and 6. Interestingly enough, phases 3, 4, 5, and 6 are also warmer phases of the MJO for North America. Cold phases for the MJO for North America are 7, 8, 1, and 2. Those are also the wet phases of the MJO for South America. What's it doing now? It's still controlled by the IOD. It's doing nothing. We're going to need to watch this very carefully because when the IOD does finally collapse, the MJO is going to take over as the dominant feature in the tropics. So I think that's what's going to take over. And the reason why is because in the El Nino region right in through here, we still have cooler water emerging, but no strong atmospheric response to it. So I don't think El Nino is going to be our major factor moving forward. We can see that here. The animation on the left, this is depth in the ocean, and you're looking at temperature anomalies. They're just not strong, and we don't see any major changes coming in the near term that are going to make overall this pattern be much different in the El Nino region. Plus, our long-range models still have considerable spread as we get through the winter on what El Nino is going to do, but overall, keeping it right here in neutral territory, maybe fading a bit toward La Nina. Southern Oscillation Index is supportive of this. It's right around -6. Remember, for El Nino to be strong, it needs to be less than -8. And we don't have any other major global factors, I think, influencing this. The QBO, the quasi-biennial oscillation, is fading back toward 0 after reaching a peak earlier this spring. And our global wind anomalies, well, they've just finally come back to around 0, which means they're not giving us a strong indication one way or the other. So I'm curious about this active pattern, and I wanted to look at the relationship between our ocean temperatures in January and this thing called the North Atlantic Oscillation. Now, when the North Atlantic Oscillation is negative, we tend to be cold and very snowy up the east coast of the United States. And that tended to happen when there was warmer water here, warmer water there, and near average to cooler than average water here and here. Now, why I show you this is because right now, we do have the cooler water there, the cooler water here, the warmer there, and the warmer there. That would suggest that the NAO stays, well, more often than not on the positive side of things. It doesn't mean it can't go over negative, but it says to me maybe it's going to stay more on the positive side of things. Now, what's the takeaway from that? The takeaway is the warmth you see here may favor a stronger subtropical jet stream, may take the north or the polar jet stream into something a bit more like this with time. And that particular pattern is one that I see that's going to really affect the rest of our winter. Now, our long-range models are not the best at picking up on this, but I'm going to show you what they're looking at right now. National Multi-Model Ensemble is what I'm showing you here, January, February, March precipitation rate. You can see the active pattern in the Ohio River Valley and the active pattern in the Northwest. Again, I think this is this feature and that feature. I think that's what's going on here, featuring a broader high sitting in this area for much of this winter. That's what the NMME would suggest for winter. What about the European? Well, it's got an active pattern over here suggesting a strong subtropical jet. But interesting difference out here in the west. It is probably picking up on the warm North Pacific, shoving more of that moisture up here into Alaska, British Columbia, rather than into the west coast of the United States. Major model difference here, but it's at least what we're looking at, okay? What about temperatures? Now remember, when you're looking at the NMME, it often has a very warm bias overall, but this is really against what NOAA had released back in October. So what it's suggesting is, at this point, warmth here, that would be, I guess, more consistent with a positive NAO pattern throughout winter. But again, I've got big question marks as to how long that lasts. And it's got cooler weather stretching along the west coast of the United States into the northwest. And we do see that the the European kind of agrees with this, shoving much of the warmth up here into the Gulf of Alaska and the Bering Sea, with the cooler pattern over in this area. So these long-range models are giving us a mess for January, February, March, and I don't trust them one bit at this point. And here's the last confusing factor. The Tropical South Atlantic Index right now is positive, which is completely against the January, February, and March forecast by the European model for a switchover to wetter than average conditions here where it's currently dry and drier in through this area. All I'm telling you here is we have got so much to watch in the longer term, and the fact that the Indian Ocean dipole is crashing removes our dominant factor we've had over the last, well, back to August. And as a result of all of that, the rest of winter, all I can tell for you is going to be unpredictable and quite volatile. But this is what some of the longer range models are looking at, both in North and South America. We need to keep a close eye on it. But that's why I do these long range videos every week so we can see how things are evolving. So I thank you for giving me some of your time today. Hope you have a great rest of your week. We'll talk to you again tomorrow morning. Thank you.